Writing Out Loud, a program designed to explore in-depth interviews with writers to hear that words have voices. Our hostess for today's program is Teresa Miller, Executive Director for the Oklahoma Center for Poets and Writers at OSU Tulsa.
Hello everyone, I'm Teresa Miller and welcome to Writing Out Loud. My very special guest today is the acclaimed novelist and writer Shelby Foote. Thank you for being here.
I'm glad to be here.
I said writer in addition to being a novelist because you're also known for your historical narratives. And you've said that the novelist and the historian are after the same truth. And I just wonder how your work as a novelist on some of these great books like Shiloh and Love in a Dry Season, how that prepared you for writing your 3-volume work on the Civil War.
It's a great shame that more historians don't try their hand at a novel. They would learn an awful lot about handling plot, which they don't seem aware of. Also, they would recognize the need for distinctive, clear, forceful writing, which they also think is a waste of time. What you want to do is get the facts together. But the truth of the matter is that the facts will never give you what happened. You can stack them up and they'll be completely accurate, but they won't tell you what's going on. And I think that, in fact, I'll be talking about it tonight or tomorrow. I think that a historian and a novelist are doing exactly the same thing, except one of them gets his facts out of documents and the other one gets his facts out of his head. But they both have an enormous respect for the facts. But the novelist knows how to handle them to put the juice in there, not falsely, but the real thing. And the historian thinks you're wasting your time if you try to write well. You better spend your time looking up facts rather than writing.
What about the Civil War compelled you so much to go into the depth you did in your writing? Because you spent 20 years on that
well,
3-volume work.
20 years is nothing compared to what really ought to be done with the war. It truly defined us. It made us what we are. We'd be a very different country today if it had not been for the Civil War deciding which way we were going. The South had one notion, the North had another, and the North prevailed, and we became that kind of country, and nobody really regrets it in the sense of they thinking we took a wrong turn, but they are interested in aspects of the Southern point of view. I think emancipation would have been carried out much better in a gradual way, as the Confederates, I hope, were intended to do. Then they suddenly announcing to 5 million people, you are free, hit the road. There's been a lot of trouble as a result of that. Many of the criticisms of the South, most especially with regard to slavery, are just and right, and many Southerners knew that they were, but there was scarcely anything they could do about it. If you had 1,000 acres of land and say 150 slaves, the slaves were worth more than the land. So for the government to come along and say the slaves were free meant bankruptcy for you, and it was done over and over again. And maybe those people, my great-grandfathers, for instance, deserved whatever happened to them, but it didn't seem to me the best solution to the problem by a long shot.
You know, one of the things that interested me about your historical narrative approach to the Civil War series was that you did have that blend, that way of bringing history to life. Could you have personally have told that story any other way?
I don't know. I could have used a whole set of things. I had to leave out as much as I put in, so I could rewrite the whole thing, God forbid, using a whole other set of facts and a whole different emphasis. So it just happened that all of my life came together. I'd found the subject I was born, I guess, to deal with, and I felt very comfortable. People are always praising me for having spent 20 years working at one thing. Believe me, I enjoyed every minute of it. It wasn't any hardship on me. I felt freer while I was writing the Civil War than any other time in my life.
I was also going to make this comparison, and I was going to see if you thought it seems to me your historical narrative approach is very similar to what Ken Burns does in his filmmaking.
There are similarities. Of course, Ken had it to go by. He used it
Absolutely.
as a sort of guide, and I liked very much what he did. He did another thing that people don't pay much attention to, but it's extremely important. Most Civil War historians, especially the greatly admired ones, think the whole thing was fought in the East, in Virginia, while there was skirmishing going on in Mississippi and out here in Texas and all. They are wrong. The Civil War was won and lost in the West. The most important battle of the Civil War, maybe, and there isn't any such thing as the most important, but if I were to put thumb screws on me and made me name one, I'd probably name Fort Donelson, very early in the war. It marked the emergence of Grant. Many other people were there. And when they lost it, they lost Kentucky, most of Tennessee, and it set the pattern for fighting in the West, where the gaining control of the Mississippi River split the South in two. And then Sherman, of course, after the Atlanta campaign, set out for the coast. So it's in the West that you ought to look for the winning and losing of the war, not in the East, where what they did under the genius of Robert E. Lee, they skirmished up and down that 100 miles of ground between Washington and Richmond. But the real war was fought out here in the West.
Writing's pretty much a solitary life. What was it like for you to be able to be a part of the Ken Burns film, The Civil War?
That was all after I'd finished the war, and besides, I was doubtful about having anything to do with it.
That's what I was wondering, if you were a little bit reluctant to get involved.
I wasn't a television fan, and I wasn't too sure that writers ought to be flashing themselves on the little screen and all that. They ought to be home writing. But I agreed to do it. And once I was into it, I saw what a good job he was going to do, so I was glad to be part of it.
And then you certainly became very recognizable. I mean, we all recognized your name, but after appearing that, people suddenly recognized you on the street, and it brought a whole new level of celebrity for you.
That's right. But the other thing that really got me was Ken limited himself, except for the pictures of present day in color. He limited himself to material right out of the war itself, the old photographs and the rest of it. And I saw that he really was out to discover what this war meant to this nation, instead of some kind of aggrandizing in itself, making a mile-setting thing. And I was glad to be part of it.
Burns, scholars, critics have all commended you for your balanced view in the book, the series, The Civil War. Was that hard for you to maintain that balance as a native Southerner?
It wasn't at all. My fiction is full of villains and heroes. And I think Bill Sykes is as important as David Copperfield. So your villains are very much a part of your story. And you identify them as villains, then you get interested in them. And they're very real people, sometimes realer than the heroes. So I had no trouble at all trying to deal sympathetically with Northern generals like Grant and Sherman.
It seems to me one of the nicest pieces of praise that came to you, it must have meant a great deal to you, was when your friend Walker Percy described the book as the American Iliad.
Right. That's quite a blurb.
Oh, you don't get blurbs any better than that. And I just wondered if when you started the Civil War, and that had to be an overwhelming thing, you sit down at the typewriter and type out the Civil War, and knowing where to begin. Did you understand then the scope this work?
None at all. What happened was I had written 5 novels down in Mississippi where I lived, and I moved to Memphis, intending to make a change of pace before I started on another set of 5. And I got a letter from Bennett Cerf, who owned and ran Random House, asking if I'd be willing to write a short history of the Civil War. He was going to start something like a landmark series, volume on the Civil War, volume on the First World War, Spanish-American War, various things. And I thought that'd be a good way to. I was going to take a year off anyhow, so I thought that'd be a good way to spend a year just writing this little short thing on the Civil War. And I sat down and outlined it, and I hadn't any more than finished and outlined it where I saw I wasn't going to be happy writing a little summary of the war. So I wrote back and told him I'd be willing to do the whole thing, spread eagle, and sort of gave him an outline of the 3 volumes. And there was silence from about 10 days, and then he wrote and said, "Go ahead." And I did for 20 years.
When you work on a project that long, is it hard to let it go?
Yes. When Gibbon finished The Decline and Fall, if I could be excused for calling him up, he described how he wrote the last word, and he was sitting outdoors in Switzerland overlooking Lake Lucerne. He said his first reaction was a huge sigh of relief. He finished this hard, long job. Then a great sadness came over him, like he was losing an old friend. And I had that same reaction when I finished it. Elation and then sort of sadness.
Yeah, I can imagine that would be so. I mentioned your good friendship with Walker Percy. How important was that friendship to you as a writer?
As a human relationship, even including my own family, I didn't have anything more important to me than my and Walker's friendship.
And your letters have been collected in the correspondence of Shelby, Foote, and Walker Percy, and this is a wonderful, wonderful read.
Well, we never thought that anybody would ever see those things except each other.
Well, what is very interesting, too, even though he gave you lavish praise by, saying the Civil War series was the, American Iliad, at the same time, he didn't always, think everything you did was wonderful. I think Follow Me Down, he didn't like that novel as much as...
He thought it was a dirty book. He had very strong feelings against Follow Me Down. Right?
Isn't it important in a literary friendship that you have to be willing to accept that kind of response in addition to the praise?
Exactly. It can make you angry. There's nothing wrong with being angry at a friend. It happens all the time. And we knew what would make each other angry, and we would only say those things on purpose. Never accidentally make them angry.
You've said that the modern writer who has influenced you the most was William Faulkner, and yet you've also said that you don't think his work will have the lasting impact of Hemingway's. Why is that?
I didn't mean impact, I meant influence. I think that Hemingway is probably the most influential writer who ever wrote, and by that I mean there's nobody writing a sports story today who's not influenced by Hemingway's style. There's nobody writing anything for newspapers and magazines that the Hemingway outlook doesn't come into it. Some of it's pretty shabby, as a matter of fact. Hemingway has his real bad side along with his great side. I don't think Hemingway is anything like as great a writer as William Faulkner, but I think he's a more influential writer than William Faulkner.
What was the greatness of Faulkner's work?
He said that what he was writing about, and all good writers are writing about, is the human heart in conflict with itself. And that's what he was writing about his whole life long, and he wrote about it wonderfully well.
Also wanted to ask you about some other Mississippi writers. First off, Eudora Welty.
Yeah.
Did you know Eudora Welty?
We were good friends, and Eudora and I used to drink bourbon together, and this and that and the other. She was always a great pleasure to be around. And as I said earlier, I don't think anybody ever spent 5 minutes with her who didn't fairly worship the ground she walked on.
What about her literary output?
It's a very real thing. Eudora measures up to any other Mississippi writer, including William Faulkner, in her particular way. She's a real good writer.
What about Richard Wright, also from Mississippi? Richard
Wright had so many personal problems that it influenced in not a good way, along with a good way. But Richard Wright was torn in so many different directions that it interfered with his work. He was obliged to take shelter in the Communist Party, for instance, but not from ideological reasons, but for sort of racial reasons. Everybody else had treated him in such a shabby way, and the Communists welcomed him with open arms.
Well, one of the things, one thing that has been said by critics is that some of the importance of his work was diminished because he was African American. Do you agree with that at all?
No, I think the opposite is true. I think his contribution is particularly African American and gets a dignity and a strength from that. Exact opposite.
Why have so many great American novelists come from the South?
I think there's a long tradition of storytelling. I remember Eudora and I were talking one time with Lewis Rubin, and we tried to answer that question. And both of us decided that the characteristic thing of a Southerner in telling a joke always tells a story. A Northerner tells a Pat and Mike joke to people, but Southerners, it's always a story. And I think this storytelling is at the very heart of what makes a novelist.
I was going to ask you what you thought about the Eastern critics and their understanding of Southern literature. Flannery O'Connor complained about that from time to time,
right,
that they didn't fully understand. Do you think that's changing and there's greater understanding of the Southern themes?
I don't think it requires as much understanding. Southern writers no longer seem to me to be all that Southern. They're just all a bunch of hippies as far as I'm concerned.
Looking back at that golden age of Southern writers, who were some of the ones that stood out for you?
Some people that are pretty well forgotten now. You don't have to go south to find them. A writer whose work I respect enormously is John O'Hara from Pennsylvania. He's almost forgotten now. His books are all out of print. They were hugely popular in that time. And O'Hara's an important writer. He does what, say, Thackeray is, mm-hmm, or better, probably Trollope is to the English novel. And yet he's faded out. I think he'll come back. Hemingway's faded too. People don't really read Hemingway anymore. They know his name, but they don't read his books. I think they've dropped off on reading Faulkner. But Faulkner has the great advantage of appealing enormously to intellectuals, college professors and the rest of them. They keep him alive.
Analyzing line after line,
right,
trying to figure out. What do you think about all this critical analysis that goes on?
I don't think it does any harm, and it entertains a lot of people.
It entertains them. I think that's quite good. Ken Burns has also said about your work that you are a great novelist who has devoted the largest portion of your life to writing one of the great works of nonfiction. So we've got to talk about your novels. Do you have a favorite of your novels, a personal favorite?
That's a question no writer can ever answer, or at least he'll give you one answer on Monday and another one on Thursday.
I kind of suspected that,
right,
yeah. But you have a great selection. We're going to be showing some of them on screen. Certainly, your novel Shiloh has been described as one of your most popular novels. Why do you...
It is the most popular of them. The trouble with a writer judging his own work is he looks at it, they're printed, and he sees what he meant to put in it, whether it's there or not. He doesn't know. He thinks it's there. So he's not a very good judge of his own work. The other thing is he's liable to judge a book by how much he enjoyed writing it. I wrote a novel called Love in a Dry Season, mm-hmm, that I enjoyed myself from start to finish. So that it's apt to be my favorite book when I think about when was I happiest, and so on.
I was going to ask you, too, were there any special challenges for you as a writer? One of the things that's always been hardest for me is a transition, how to get from the narrative transitions.
Yeah.
Did you have any special challenges to you as a writer?
No, I enjoyed those challenges. They were challenges, but I enjoyed them. I learned a great deal from Henry James about shifting point of view and putting climaxes in books and places where they'd be effective. And those are technical problems and therefore usually fun to solve.
Do you ever go back and reread your novels?
I do. I even listen to them on tape read by someone else.
What's your reaction to audiobooks?
I enjoy it. It's good to go to sleep by.
Do you get new? Are you ever surprised by lines that you've written and think, did I really write that?
No.
No, you remember every one.
I guess so, if I'm reminded.
Yeah. Do you actually remember where you were when you wrote certain passages that stand out?
Sometimes.
When it meant so.
Well, that's very easy. I do all my writing at my desk. If I go stay at a hotel somewhere, I don't wake up in the middle of the night and write something.
Do you use a computer?
No, thank God, no.
You're still using a typewriter?
I don't even use a typewriter. I use a dip pen.
Oh, a dip pen?
Not even a fountain pen. It makes me take my time. 300 or 400 words, 500, 600 is a good day for me. Good, long, hard day's work.
Do you think we're producing some novels too quickly these days with the emphasis on commercialism and publishing?
Some writers write fast, others write slow. It doesn't have anything to do with how good or bad they are. Everybody's got his own way. To talk about writers is like talking about chairs. There's so many different kinds of writing.
Not only are you a very prolific writer, a lot has been written about you. The University of Mississippi Press has published a collection of interviews with you, conversations with Shelby Foote. And I want to talk about this new biography of you, Stuart Chapman's Shelby Foote, A Writer's Life. What do you think about a biography of you?
I think we would do better not to write about it. It's so inaccurate that it angers me.
Does it? You told me.
Not his opinion of my work. The biographical facts are so wrong.
Well, you told me a very interesting story about your bulldog.
Yeah. I had a bull terrier named Rattler. He was too brave. If he had a difference in another dog, he'd have to kill the other dog. And he got him mixed up with a hound we had called Harry, who was a very cowardly dog with a low threshold of pain. And he thinks that Harry was Rattler. And it's not a very serious mistake, but it's a complete mistake.
Well, you know, criticize me but not my dog kind of philosophy. I mean, we want the record straight. I'm glad we got to go with it.
That's absolutely true.
Is it sort of overwhelming? Is it surprising to you sometimes that all this has been written about you, that people are studying you like this?
It surprises me some. I don't mind it at all. I don't... Mr. Faulkner had an utter privacy thing. He was strong on that. They wanted to put him on the cover of both Time and Newsweek, and he wouldn't see him, wouldn't talk with him. He just didn't believe in writers having anything to do with critics or journalists.
What sort of things do you like to read?
I like to read the classic things. I probably enjoy reading Shakespeare more than anything in the world. I like to read history, Roman history. Tacitus is my favorite historian. I like to read the classic standard things. It took me a long time to get around to reading several books that I had trouble finding sometime. Richardson, for instance, I had a hard time finding. It's the longest novel in the English language. Forgot the name of it even. And it's a wonderful book. But I looked at second-hand bookstores all over New York until I finally found it. It's very strange what can be good to you after you mature. When I finished the war, I took a year off to read books that I enjoyed so much before I started the war. And I was a completely different person reading that, so that it was illuminating to me to reread things that I had read as an adolescent and see how much I had missed. It's an interesting thing. Everybody should do that. Go back and reread the books that impressed him most when he was like 15, 16.
I agree with you. We were talking off camera about Carson McCullers, and I went back recently and reread Member of the Wedding, and I thought this is one of the most extraordinary books I've ever read.
That's right.
You met so many of the great authors and know so many of the great authors and artists. Were there ever any writers that you wanted to meet that you didn't get to?
Yeah, any number of them. I was sorry I never met John O'Hara. Most people who knew O'Hara said you're very fortunate not to have met him.
Might have been disillusioned.
I still would like to have met him.
Yeah. Do you have any advice, since obviously you've looked to other writers as mentors, at least through their work, for people who are wanting to write now?
If you want to write, there are two things you have to do. One is read, and above all, reread. When you reread a good writer, you know where he's going, so you can watch him get there. You don't know where he's going the first time you read it, so you're so busy seeing where he's going. But when you know where he's going, then you can see him build up this thing before he's going there. So that teaches you a great deal. The other thing is keep writing. Try to describe, not for any reason, just somebody walking across the room. And if you can get it right, then you're ready to start being a writer.
As we look over your career, you've had so many successes. Were there ever points in your career when you think, gosh, I just can't go on with this, that you got discouraged, or did you just never allow yourself to feel that way?
I never had that problem. I've had sad days and happy days, but I never felt that my writing was any doubt about that's what I should do.
What are you working on now?
I'm working on fiddling around with things. I did a 3-volume collection of Chekhov stories for Model Library, doing a 2-volume on Maupassant. I did an in-depth study of Stephen Crane's Red Badge of Courage, things like that. They suit me now. I don't want to start a novel or write a history anymore. I've had my discharge.
And we've just got a few minutes left here, but when you go back and you look at Stephen Crane's Red Badge of Courage, what message do you want to get across to readers of that book?
Well, that particular book, he keeps having optimistic views that everything's going to be fine. It always turns out terrible. And the end of the book is everything's really going to be wonderful, and you know it's not. Gettysburg is just up the road. The battle fought in the Red Badge is obviously Chancellorsville. And Gettysburg is going to follow soon, and you know that all his rosy hopes are fixing to disappear in the boom and bang of Gettysburg. So it's interesting to see from that point of view.
Mr. Foote, it's been a great honor to get to visit with you today. Thank you for taking time out to share with us. Congratulations on this wonderful trilogy and your collection of novels. And I'll be curious to visit with you again and to see which novel is now your favorite. Take care, Mr. Foote, and thank all of you for joining us on Writing Out Loud.